How many of you were affected by the storm last Tuesday with power outages? I was without power. Many of you are lucky because, the wind was really bad where I was, and as well as the lightning. In fact, not just on Tuesday, but when we had the storm the other day, it was also pretty bad. And each time I'm watching two Yorkie poos. Their names are Riley and Trapper. And they're pretty ornery and full of energy. But when a lightning storm comes, they get nervous. And when you have one of those big claps of thunder with the house lights up with the lightning, they literally jump into my arms and try to hold on to me because they're terrified. They have no control over what's going on, so they're looking for protection. They're looking to be saved. It's quite cute and everything, but fear is something that renders you incapable of doing what you normally would do. In our first reading, we have the story of Elijah being in a cave at Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai, and he's there for a purpose. And it's not just because God says he's going to appear. He has escaped to that area after confronting Ahab and Jezebel, the king and queen, and had slaughtered their prophets. Not God's prophets, theirs. You see, the king and queen had people who would go about acknowledging that Baal, B-A-A-L, was their god, and he is the one that has comforted Ahab as well as Jezebel and the people. And they always say good things about the king, when in reality, they're not doing some really good things. In fact, they're not even obeying the commandments of the Lord. So when Elijah confronts the king and says there's going to be, a famine, there's going to be no rain for God knows how long, and that they ought to, repent, they don't. So Elijah challenges the prophets of Jezebel and Ahab and confronts them, and basically he mocks them because this god Baal doesn't do what they are asking for it to be done. Elijah not only shows that God is with him, and that when they see what Elijah is able to do with the power of God, the people, now acknowledge God as their Lord once again. But after slaughtering those prophets of Baal, Jezebel said, "You're going to get yours." So he's in fear that his life is going to be taken. So he leaves basically the northern kingdom where Mount Carmel is and goes all the way back 40 days journey, all the way down to Sinai, where, Moses saw God in a fire, in a burning bush. Well, here he is in a cave, fearing Ahab and Jezebel. And it's there that God says his presence is going to come before him. And you hear about the earthquake, which oftentimes is a manifestation of God's power being present. You have the wind, same thing. But God's not in the wind, he's not in the earthquake, and this time he's not even in the fire. But Elijah hears God in that tiny whisper. And what does he do? He hides his face. Why? Fear of God. If you look at God, you're going to die. Anyone who looks upon God is going to die. That's the common knowledge. So he hides his face, And he realizes now he ought to fear God more than he fears Ahab and Jezebel. In fact, God tells him to go back and confront them again, which he's not too happy about, but that fear of God within him and knowing that he should act in confidence with the God that he knows instead of being paralyzed by the fear of people on earth. In today's gospel reading, the disciples in a boat traveling across the sea encounter a storm. They're afraid first, but then they see Jesus coming and walking on the water. They become terrified. They're incapable of understanding what's going on. They think he's a ghost. And he says, "Do not be afraid, it is I." And to which Peter says, "If it is you, Lord, then let me walk on the water towards you." So Jesus encourages them, "Don't be afraid, come." And sure enough, because of God's presence, he's able to do something that he wouldn't ordinarily be able to do. He's walking on the water. But then he notices the wind and the waves, and, well, he doubts. And without the faith, he's sinking. So he cries out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus reaches out and grabs him. And both enter the boat. And now the wind has died down. It's calm. It's calm because God is with them. When we think about the chaos, the storms, tropical storms, regular thunderstorms, tornado warnings, whatever is there, there's fear. And it keeps us inside and makes us incapable of doing things out there in the world to make other people's lives better. Even this pandemic has us all quarantined. Why? Because we're living in fear. Is the fear justified? Should we follow the science? Well, sure. We have to try to safeguard each other the best we can as we know it. But at the same time, we cannot allow this fear to paralyze us from doing what we ought to be able to do. For with God's help, we can do things far beyond our wildest expectations. People think that just by sitting back and not doing anything at home, that they can't do anything, that they're incapable of bringing about peace in the world. In reality, because we refer to ourselves as adopted children of God, just as the Israeli people used to acknowledge that, we ought to realize that we, because we're children of God and God is all-powerful, that we have inherited through his grace power. And our prayers have power. And we need to take the time to actualize that power. And we need to take the times in the safest conditions to go out and still proclaim God's presence in our world, in our lives, so that people will no longer be paralyzed in fear, but continue to help in God's loving, saving plan. I thank all of you for coming here today, to participate in the liturgy. And I thank the people who are participating at home. But they, knowing they have, issues whereby they can endanger their lives and the lives of others, they've chosen to stay at home and participate virtually with live streaming. But we need, as a people, children of God, to take to mind and heart there is something we always can do, that our efforts are not for naught, that when we participate in this celebration and offer our sacrifice, right before we have the Eucharistic prayer, I say, brothers and sisters, pray that your sacrifice and mine will be acceptable to God the Almighty Father. It is your sacrifice to people that you know who you want sins to be removed from their lives so they can stand up and not be afraid. They themselves will benefit because your sacrifice is being perfected in the perfect sacrifice of Christ that takes place on this altar. So we take the time with confidence, Latin word, C-O-N, with, F-I-D-E-I, fide, which is faith, with confidence, with reassurance. Just as Elijah was reassured, just as Peter was reassured, we need to be reassured that God take away the power that we have. We need to do things smartly. God gave us this to use, but we ought not just to stop doing everything that we can do. Do not be afraid. Jesus is always inviting us to come to him, that he will save us, that he will nourish us, that he will protect us. If we, as Catholic parishioners, would just say the Lord's Prayer each and every day and remind ourselves that, yes, I am a child of God. Yes, he has given me the power to walk past the sins of others, to lift people up instead of tearing them down, to ask them to be part of our daily life, that we can do his will and lead all people to salvation. As we know the story of Peter, he indeed, just as Elijah would continue to confront the politicians of his day, Peter does the same, and he gives up his life. Why? Because he trusts that God will save him no matter what. Allow God to be your source of strength, comfort, and peace. And may God always bless you all.